What would you do if your own father stole 3.5 million from you? Last March, at his lavish 60th birthday party, my father raised a champagne toast calling me a worthless investment, while 150 guests laughed. What he didn't know was that I'd discovered something devastating just hours before. He and my aunt had secretly drained my grandmother's trust fund meant for me, forged documents to cover their tracks, and used the money to fund my brother's failed businesses, the same brother who'd bankrupted 3 companies while I quietly built a $280 million portfolio. But here's the thing about stealing from someone who manages money for a living. We keep receipts. And the folder hidden in my clutch that night contained enough evidence to destroy a 40-year empire in less than 40 minutes. My name is Grace Anderson. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how I exposed my father's crimes at the one place he thought he was untouchable, his own shareholder meeting. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Crystal Ballroom had never looked more magnificent. Golden chandeliers cast warm light over 150 of Seattle's most influential people. Bank CEOs, state senators, venture capitalists who controlled billions. They'd all come to celebrate Richard Anderson's 60th birthday, a milestone for a man who'd built his investment empire from a single office to a 45-story tower downtown. I sat at table 3, strategically placed just far enough from the main table to signal my lower status, but close enough that everyone could see me. My Armani dress cost more than most people's monthly salary, but in this room, I might as well have been wearing rags. The champagne was Dom Perignon 2008, the caviar, Beluga, everything precisely calculated to impress. That's when my father stood up, crystal flute in hand, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. "Friends, partners, family," Richard began, his voice carrying that commanding tone that had closed 1,000 deals. "Tonight, I want to thank everyone who's contributed to my success. My brilliant son Michael, who's never afraid to take risks." Michael, who'd declared bankruptcy 3 times and currently owed $2.8 million to various creditors, raised his glass with a smirk. "My devoted wife Patricia, the backbone of our family." My mother smiled that practiced smile she'd perfected over 30 years of marriage. "And," Richard paused, his eyes finding mine across the room, "to my biggest disappointment, my daughter Grace. Proof that even with the best education money can buy, some investments simply never yield returns." The laughter started as uncomfortable chuckles, then grew bolder when they saw Richard himself laughing. A few people glanced at me with pity. Most avoided eye contact entirely. Thomas Wright, CEO of Northwest Ventures, actually shook his head in amusement. I kept my professional smile frozen in place, the same expression I'd worn through 15 years of these public humiliations. My fingers found the edge of my clutch under the table, feeling the outline of the folder inside. "At least Michael has the courage to fail," Richard continued, warming to his theme. "Grace just exists, safely, predictably, forgettably." But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't the same woman who'd silently endured these moments. Tonight, I had evidence that would destroy everything Richard Anderson had built. The question was, would I have the courage to use it? Sitting there, absorbing yet another public humiliation, my mind cataloged 15 years of similar moments like evidence in a case file. When I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with my MBA, Richard told his golf buddies it was just a participation trophy for rich kids these days. The fact that I'd worked 3 jobs to supplement my partial scholarship didn't fit his narrative. When I made partner at Sterling Capital at 31, the youngest in the firm's history, he announced at Thanksgiving dinner that quotas for women have really lowered the bar. Never mind that I'd brought in $47 million in new business that year alone. The portfolio I managed had grown from $50 million to $280 million under my leadership, generating average annual returns of 47%. But to Richard, it was just moving other people's money around. Anyone with a calculator could do it. Meanwhile, Michael's first company folded after burning through $3 million of investor money. At least he's got vision, Richard said. Michael's second venture, a restaurant chain, filed for bankruptcy with $1.8 million in debt. That's what entrepreneurs do. They take risks, Richard explained to anyone who'd listen. His third failure, a tech startup that never shipped a single product, left another million in unpaid bills. He's learning valuable lessons, Richard insisted, while writing another check to cover his son's living expenses. I'd never told anyone about my real numbers, not the full portfolio value, not the job offers from Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. I'd turned down to stay in Seattle, hoping somehow to finally earn my father's approval. Not the private clients who'd specifically requested me after the Berkshire deal I'd orchestrated. In Richard's mind, I would always be the daughter who played it safe, who lacked vision, who represented his one failed investment. He'd constructed this narrative so thoroughly that even I had started to believe it. But that was before Margaret Smith pulled me aside tonight with a USB drive that would change everything. Richard wasn't finished with his toast. He clinked his knife against his glass again, and the room fell silent with anticipation. I have an announcement, he said, his voice taking on that formal tone he used for major business declarations. After considerable thought about the future of Anderson Holdings, I've decided it's time to ensure proper succession. My stomach tightened. Succession planning had been a forbidden topic for years. Richard was too proud to acknowledge his mortality. Effective immediately, I'm transferring my 45% stake in Anderson Holdings to someone with true entrepreneurial spirit. He raised his glass toward Michael. To my son, who understands that fortune favors the bold. The room erupted in applause. Michael stood up, basking in the approval, his cocaine-dilated pupils hidden behind the practiced charm he'd inherited from our father. The stake was worth $12 million at current valuations, money he'd burn through within 2 years if his track record held. But Dad, someone called out. Jennifer, my cousin who worked in the company's legal department. What about Grace? Doesn't she have equity too? Richard's laugh was sharp as crystal breaking. Grace? She doesn't have the vision for business leadership. She's a calculator, a very expensive calculator, but nothing more. The company needs someone who understands risk, innovation, the art of the deal. My Aunt Helen leaned over to her table mate, loud enough for me to hear. Finally, the right person gets what they deserve. The irony was breathtaking. Michael, who'd never successfully managed anything beyond his drug dealer's phone number, was being handed a fortune, while I, who'd quietly built one of the most successful portfolios on the West Coast, was being erased from the family legacy entirely. Patricia, my mother, caught my eye from across the room. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I saw her fingers trembling around her champagne flute. She knew this was wrong, but she'd never contradict Richard in public. She'd made that choice 30 years ago and stuck to it through every humiliation. To Michael Anderson, Richard raised his glass higher, the future of Anderson Holdings. To Michael, the room echoed. I raised my glass too, the perfect picture of the supportive daughter. But my other hand was already reaching for my phone under the table. Because what happened next would make this announcement look like a footnote in tomorrow's business news. I was heading to the bathroom to compose myself when a hand caught my elbow. Margaret Smith, who'd been CFO of Anderson Holdings until her sudden resignation last year, stood in the hallway shadows. Grace, I can't stay silent anymore, she whispered, glancing around nervously. At 62, Margaret had the kind of integrity that had made her legendary in Seattle's financial circles. Come with me now. She led me to a quiet corner near the service elevator, away from the celebration. Her hands shook as she pulled a USB drive from her purse. I've wanted to give this to you for 3 years, she said. But I was scared. I'm retiring next month, moving to Florida. I can't leave without making this right. Margaret, what are you talking about? Your grandmother's trust fund, the one she set up for you in 2019, before she died. My blood chilled. That was dissolved. Dad said there were tax complications. There were no tax complications. Margaret's voice was steady now, the voice that had delivered hundreds of financial reports. Your father and Helen created false documents. They transferred 3.5 million meant for you into an offshore account in the Caymans. She plugged the USB into her tablet, showing me email after email. The timestamps were from the company server, the IP addresses traced back to Richard's office computer. One email from Richard to Helen made my hands clench. Transfer Grace's trust before she realizes it exists. She won't question it if we cite tax issues. Helen's response: already prepared the paperwork. The notary thinks it's a standard estate restructuring. Another from Richard: that money will cover Michael's debts and leave enough for the Aspen property. Grace makes enough at her little job anyway. My little job, the one that generated more revenue than Anderson Holdings had seen in 5 years. Every email has been verified by our IT system, Margaret continued. David Park in IT helped me pull these. He's willing to testify if needed. Grace, this is fraud, federal fraud. Your grandmother specifically stipulated that money was yours, untouchable by anyone else. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Your father threatened to destroy my reputation, my pension, everything, but watching tonight, seeing him give Michael everything while calling you worthless, I realized I'm more afraid of dying with this on my conscience than losing my retirement. She pressed the USB into my hand. There's more. 8 million in company funds misappropriated over the last 5 years, all documented. The bathroom door opened and Helen herself emerged, checking her lipstick. She saw us and smirked. Plotting something, ladies? Grace, shouldn't you be inside congratulating your brother? I smiled back, the USB hidden in my palm. Just heading there now, Aunt Helen. Back in my downtown condo at 11:47 p.m., I sat at my home office desk with Margaret's USB drive glowing blue in my laptop. The city lights sparkled below, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing opportunity. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd saved but never called. James Bradley, senior audit partner at Ernst & Young. We'd met at a conference last year where he'd given me his card saying, if you ever need someone who values truth over politics, call me. He answered on the third ring despite the late hour. Grace Anderson? This must be important. I need a forensic audit done on Anderson Holdings, completely independent, completely confidential, within 48 hours. There was a pause. That's aggressive timing. May I ask why? Because there's a shareholder meeting in 3 days, and I have evidence of 8 million in fraud that needs professional verification. 8 million? His voice sharpened. Grace, that's serious. We're talking potential SEC involvement. I know. That's why I need E&Y's reputation behind this. What would it cost for a rush job? For a complete forensic analysis with that timeline, you're looking at 50,000 minimum. And Grace, once we start, we can't stop. If we find what you're suggesting, we're legally obligated to report it. I understand. I looked at my personal investment account balance on another screen. $1.8 million in liquid assets. Send me the engagement letter. I'll wire the retainer tonight. After hanging up, I used my partner-level access to log into Anderson Holdings' servers. Richard had forgotten I still had credentials from when I'd briefly worked there 5 years ago, before I'd realized I'd never escape his shadow inside his own company. I downloaded everything: financial statements, board minutes, email archives. My partner status at Sterling Capital gave me legal cover. I was conducting due diligence on a company where I held shares. That 0.5% stake from Grandma that Richard couldn't touch was about to become very valuable. At 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not James Bradley, someone even more unexpected. Lawrence Chen, Senior VP at BlackRock Capital. Grace, I know it's late, but I wanted to reach out personally. We've been watching your portfolio performance. Frankly, it's exceptional. We have an opportunity that just opened up. Managing Director for our Northwest Division. We'd like to meet Monday if you're interested. Monday, the day after the shareholder meeting. I'm interested, I said, but I have a commitment Sunday that I cannot miss. The Anderson Holdings shareholder meeting? Yes, we're aware. Actually, that's part of why we want you. Someone who stands up to Richard Anderson is exactly the kind of leader we need. After ending the call, I stared at the folder I'd assembled: audit engagement letter, downloaded evidence, Margaret's USB, and now a tentative job offer from the world's largest asset manager. For 15 years, I'd played by Richard's rules. In 72 hours, I was going to show him what happened when you underestimated a very expensive calculator. The next 36 hours blurred together in a symphony of preparation. James Bradley's team took over a conference room at the Four Seasons, transforming it into a war room of laptops, printed spreadsheets, and coffee cups. "Grace," James said at hour 20. His tie loosened, eyes red-rimmed but alert. "This is bigger than 8 million. We're seeing systematic transfers dating back 5 years. Your father and aunt created shell companies, fake consulting agreements, the works." David Park from Anderson Holdings' IT department arrived at midnight Saturday, looking nervous but determined. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions," he said, pulling out his laptop. "Every email has metadata. Every transfer has a digital signature. I can verify everything." He showed us the email authentication logs, irrefutable proof that the messages had originated from Richard's and Helen's computers during business hours, from inside Anderson Holdings. "There's something else," David added. "3 days ago, your father tried to delete these emails from the server, but we have triple redundancy backups. He doesn't know they still exist." By Sunday morning, we had a 20-slide presentation that would destroy Richard Anderson's reputation in 20 minutes. Each slide was a bullet: verified evidence, authenticated documents, federal statutes violated. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. BlackRock again. "Grace, it's Larry Fink," the CEO himself. "Lawrence tells me you're interested in the position. I wanted to call personally. We're prepared to offer $2.5 million base, plus performance bonuses. You'd manage $1.2 billion initially, with potential to grow to $5 billion within 2 years." "Mr. Fink, I'm honored, but I need to ask, why now? We've been watching you for 3 years. Your Berkshire deal, your consistent returns, your ethics in a cutthroat industry. But what sealed it was Margaret Smith's recommendation. She called me yesterday, said you're the most talented analyst she's ever worked with." Margaret. Even while risking everything to expose the truth, she was still protecting my future. "Can I give you an answer Monday?" "Take the time you need. But Grace, whatever happens at that shareholder meeting today, know that you have options, real ones." I looked at the folder on my desk, now thick with evidence, audit reports, legal documentation. In 3 hours, I'd walk into Anderson Holdings for the first time in 2 years. Richard expected me to stay silent, to play my role as the disappointing daughter. He had no idea that his expensive calculator had just finished computing his downfall. March 15th dawned gray and drizzling, perfect Seattle weather for what was about to unfold. I dressed carefully: black Armani power suit, minimal jewelry except for Grandma's pearl necklace, the one thing Richard couldn't steal. The folder went into my Hermes clutch, along with a backup USB drive. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Don't embarrass yourself today. Just sit quietly like you always do." Then another from Mom. "Please don't make waves. Your father is in a good mood." I checked into the Four Seasons downtown at 7 a.m. Margaret was already waiting in the lobby, wearing her lucky red suit from her CFO days. "You sure about this?" she asked, though her eyes said she already knew the answer. 15 years of silence is enough." "Good." She handed me another USB, backup of the backup, and Grace, I've already sent copies to 3 law firms just in case something happens to us today. Smart. Richard might be arrogant, but he wasn't above desperate measures. The financial press had been alerted, subtly. A few strategic leaks about major announcements at Anderson Holdings' shareholder meeting had ensured reporters from the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Reuters would attend. They expected a routine succession announcement. They were about to get tomorrow's front page. James Bradley texted, "E&Y team standing by. Legal counsel retained. SEC contact ready if needed." I stood at the window, looking at Anderson Holdings' tower piercing the morning clouds. 45 floors of glass and steel, Richard's monument to himself. The logo, his signature in stylized font, was carved into Italian marble in the lobby. The same lobby where, 5 years ago, he'd introduced me to investors as my daughter who works in finance, though not at our level, of course. My Uber was waiting. As I slid into the back seat, I pulled up my portfolio dashboard one more time. $280 million under management, 47% average returns, 0 client complaints in 10 years. Anderson Holdings, please, I told the driver. Big meeting? He asked, noting my outfit. I looked at the folder in my lap, thinking of every humiliation, every stolen dollar, every public mockery. You could say that. Today, some people learn what expensive calculators can really do. The Anderson Holdings tower loomed above me as I stepped out of the Uber at 8:45 a.m. The morning rain had stopped, leaving the building's glass facade gleaming like a threat. The security guard at the front desk didn't recognize me. Name and purpose? Grace Anderson, shareholder meeting. He frowned, scanning his list. I don't see you on the approved. I'm a shareholder. I showed him my documentation. 0.5% stake. I have a legal right to attend. He made a call, his face reddening as someone apparently chewed him out for questioning an Anderson. My apologies, Ms. Anderson. Executive elevator to the 40th floor. The lobby was already filling with attendees. I recognized faces from Seattle's business elite, venture capitalists, bank presidents, board members from other companies. Thomas Wright from Northwest Ventures was chatting with reporters near the coffee station. Grace? David Park appeared beside me, looking nervous but resolved. I'm here, whatever you need. Just be ready to verify the emails if asked. The elevator opened and Helen stepped out with her assistant. She saw me, and her face shifted from surprise to suspicion. Grace, I didn't expect you to attend. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Aunt Helen. Her eyes narrowed. Your father's in excellent spirits. Don't ruin this for him. I wouldn't dream of ruining anything that wasn't already rotten. She stalked past me, but I caught her pulling out her phone, undoubtedly warning Richard. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. When the doors opened, I stepped into controlled chaos. The boardroom was set up for 200 people, cameras from financial networks positioned strategically, and staff rushing around with last-minute preparations. Richard stood at the center of it all, commanding the room like a conductor with an orchestra. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable. He was laughing with board members, completely in his element. Then he saw me. His laugh died. His eyes went from surprise to calculating to dismissive in the span of 3 seconds. He walked over, his smile sharp as a blade. Grace, what are you doing here? I'm a shareholder, Dad. Small, insignificant, but still a shareholder. This isn't the place for family drama. I smiled, the same professional smile I'd perfected over 15 years. Who said anything about drama? I'm just here for the meeting. His jaw clenched, but with reporters watching, he couldn't make a scene. Sit in the back, stay quiet. As he walked away, I touched the folder in my clutch. Stay quiet? Not today. If you've ever been told you're not enough by the very people who should support you most, comment justice below. Your story matters, and you deserve to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what happens when truth meets power. This story is based on real events and shared with permission from those involved. At precisely 9 a.m., Richard called the meeting to order. 200 of Seattle's most influential people settled into their seats. The cameras started rolling. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Anderson Holdings' annual shareholder meeting, Richard began, his voice resonating with 40 years of practice. This has been our most successful year to date. Revenue up 18%, acquisitions completed ahead of schedule, and our position as the Northwest's premier investment firm solidified. He clicked through slides showing gleaming numbers, strategic wins, photos of ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The audience nodded approvingly. This was Richard Anderson at his best: polished, powerful, persuasive. Now, before we move to voting matters, are there any questions from shareholders? A few softball questions came from friendly board members. Richard answered them with practiced ease, even throwing in some self-deprecating humor that got comfortable laughs. Then I raised my hand. Richard's smile flickered but held. Yes, in the back? I stood up, my voice carrying clear and professional. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Grace Anderson, shareholder. I have a question about the line item on page 47 of the financial report. $8 million listed as consulting fees over the past 5 years. Could you elaborate on what consulting services were provided? The room went silent. That was an unusually large amount for consulting, and everyone knew it. Richard's face flushed slightly. That's an operational matter that, I believe shareholders have a right to understand significant expenditures, I continued, pulling out my folder. Especially when Ernst & Young's independent audit suggests these funds were transferred to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters started typing furiously. Thomas Wright leaned forward. Richard, what is she talking about? This is ridiculous, Richard sputtered. My daughter is clearly— I have the audit report right here, I said, holding up the document with E&Y's letterhead clearly visible. Conducted over the past 48 hours by James Bradley's team. Every transaction traced, every shell company identified. Board member Patricia Hoffman stood up. Richard, we need to see this immediately. This is an ambush, Helen shouted from her seat. She has no right. Actually, David Park stood up from his seat in the IT section. She has every right, and I can verify that all the emails referenced in that report are authentic. I manage the servers. I've seen them myself. Richard's carefully constructed world started cracking. But I wasn't done. The $8 million was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. Since we're discussing financial irregularities, I said, my voice steady as a news anchor's, perhaps we should also address the matter of the Grace Anderson Trust. Richard went white. Helen started to stand, but Thomas Wright motioned for her to sit. What trust? Wright asked. I connected my laptop to the presentation system. David Park had given me the access codes. The first email appeared on the massive screen behind Richard. From Richard Anderson to Helen Morrison. Date, September 15th, 2019, 2:47 p.m. Subject, Grace Trust issue. Transfer the 3.5 M from Grace's trust before she discovers it exists. Cite tax complications if questioned. She won't dig deeper. Never does. The room erupted. Reporters were on their feet. Board members were shouting questions. That's fabricated, Helen screamed. This is defamation. David Park stood again. Ma'am, I can verify the email's authenticity right now. He pulled out his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Here's the metadata. Originated from IP address 192.168.145, Mr. Anderson's office computer, September 15, 2019, at 2:47 p.m. Pacific. Digital signature matches. Server logs confirm. It's real. I clicked to the next email. From Helen Morrison to Richard Anderson. Date, September 15, 2019, 4:23 p.m. Subject, Grace Trust issue. Already prepared the documents. Notary believes it's routine estate restructuring. The 3.5 M will cover Michael's debts with enough left for the Aspen property. Grace makes enough at her little job anyway. My little job, I said, letting the words hang in the air. The one where I manage $280 million and generate returns that exceed Anderson Holdings' best year by 30%. Michael shot to his feet. You're destroying our family. No, Michael, I'm exposing what already destroyed it: greed and fraud. The next slide showed the trust document itself, Grandma's signature clear, the terms unambiguous. $3.5 million to my granddaughter Grace Anderson to be held in trust and transferred on her 30th birthday. This bequest cannot be altered or redirected by any party, including the executor. You stole my inheritance, I said, looking directly at Richard. You stole it to pay for Michael's failures and your vacation home. That's not just unethical, it's criminal fraud. SEC Representative Jennifer Walsh, whom I'd noticed sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to need you to preserve all documents immediately. Consider this official notice of investigation. The cameras were rolling, capturing every second of Richard's empire crumbling. His face had gone from white to red to a concerning purple. You ungrateful, he started. Careful, Dad, I said calmly. Everything you say is being recorded, and we're just getting started. Because the trust theft was shocking, but what came next would end his career entirely. The boardroom doors opened with dramatic timing. 3 lawyers from Patterson Law entered, their expressions grave. I recognized the lead attorney, Sandra Patterson herself. She only appeared for the biggest cases. Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, I'm here representing Grace Anderson in matters of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. She handed Richard a thick envelope, then Helen, then Michael. You're being served with civil suits for fraud, conversion of trust assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. Additionally, criminal referrals have been made to the Department of Justice. This is insane! Richard slammed his fist on the podium. She can't. Actually, she can, Patterson continued. We have forensic accounting from Ernst & Young, digital verification from your own IT department, and 17 witnesses who've provided sworn affidavits about systematic fraud spanning 5 years. The SEC representative stepped forward. Mr. Anderson, I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all Anderson Holdings transactions pending investigation. No funds can be moved, no shares transferred, effective immediately. Board member Patricia Hoffman stood up. Richard, as lead independent director, I'm calling an emergency board meeting right now. Shareholders, please remain seated. The other board members huddled. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his empire collapsing in real time. Helen was frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to move money that was already frozen. Michael lost it completely. You vindictive witch! He lunged toward me, but security intercepted him. You're destroying everything because Daddy didn't love you enough? No, Michael, I said calmly as security restrained him. I'm revealing what you all destroyed with your greed, and you just admitted on camera that you knew about the stolen trust funds. His face went white as he realized his mistake. Sandra Patterson addressed the room. For the record, Ernst & Young's audit revealed $8 million in fraudulent transfers to shell companies, $3.5 million stolen from a protected trust, and evidence of tax evasion exceeding $2 million. These are not allegations. These are documented facts. Thomas Wright stood up from the board huddle. Mr. Anderson, pending the investigation's outcome, the board is placing you on immediate administrative leave. You can't do that. I built this company. And you stole from it, Wright replied. Security, please escort Mr. Anderson from the building. But I wasn't finished. The folder in my clutch had one more document, the one that would shift the entire narrative from family drama to professional triumph. As security moved toward Richard, Michael completely unraveled. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck, and his pupils were clearly dilated. He was high at a shareholder meeting. This is all your fault, he screamed at me, breaking free from security's grip. You poisonous, jealous failure. You couldn't stand that Dad chose me. Chose you for what, Michael? I asked calmly. To burn through another fortune? You're $2.8 million in debt from 3 failed businesses. At least I tried. At least I took risks. You just sit in your safe little job moving numbers around. The cameras caught everything. Bloomberg's reporter was practically salivating. My safe little job? I pulled out my phone, projecting my portfolio dashboard onto the screen. This safe little job? The numbers appeared in stark clarity. $280 million under management. 5-year return, 237%. Client satisfaction, 100%. 0 compliance violations. Someone whispered. That's better than Berkshire's returns. Michael laughed manically. So what? It's not real business. It's not building something. You're right, I said. I didn't build 3 companies that failed. I built one portfolio that succeeded beyond every benchmark. And Michael? Every penny you lost, I made back tenfold for my clients. That's when he snapped completely. Dad promised me everything. We had a deal. 3 years of keeping quiet about the trust fund, and I'd get the company. You weren't supposed to fight back. You never fight back. The room went silent. Even Richard looked stunned. SEC Representative Walsh spoke first. Mr. Anderson, you just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud. On camera. With 200 witnesses. Michael realized what he'd done. His face crumpled. I didn't mean… Security, Thomas Wright said quietly. Remove him, now. Oof. As they dragged Michael out, he was sobbing. It was supposed to be mine. Dad promised. It was all supposed to be mine. Helen tried to slip out during the commotion, but Patterson's team blocked her exit. Ms. Morrison, you're not going anywhere. The FBI will want to speak with you. The Wall Street Journal reporter raised his hand. Ms. Anderson, did you know about this conspiracy? I suspected something when my inheritance disappeared, but I never imagined they'd documented their crimes so thoroughly in company emails. Richard finally spoke, his voice broken. Grace, we can discuss this privately. No, Dad. You chose to humiliate me publicly for 15 years. You can face the consequences publicly, too. Before we conclude, I said, commanding the room's attention, I have one more announcement. The chaos settled into expectant silence. Even Richard, slumped in his chair with security flanking him, looked up. I clicked to a new slide. My portfolio's full details appeared. Every metric, every benchmark beaten, every record broken. 5 years of performance that most fund managers couldn't achieve in 20. For 5 years, I've managed this portfolio while being told I was a disappointment, a failure, someone who played it too safe. The truth is, I've been generating returns that Anderson Holdings hasn't seen in its 40-year history. Gasps rippled through the audience. Several fund managers were taking photos of the screen, but that's not the announcement. I clicked again. The BlackRock logo appeared, followed by a letter on official letterhead. Dear Ms. Anderson, I read aloud. BlackRock Capital is pleased to offer you the position of Managing Director, Northwest Division, overseeing $1.2 billion in assets, with potential growth to $5 billion. Your exceptional performance, ethical standards, and proven leadership make you the ideal candidate. Signed, Lawrence Fink, CEO. The room exploded. BlackRock was the world's largest asset manager. This position would make me one of the most powerful people in Northwest finance, far exceeding anything Richard had achieved. That's impossible, Richard whispered. You're nobody. You're just my daughter. No, Dad, I stopped being just your daughter the day I realized your approval would never come. Larry Fink called me personally this morning. He said they've been watching me for 3 years. They especially appreciated the Berkshire deal I orchestrated, the one you said was lucky timing. Thomas Wright was on his feet. Grace, that's extraordinary. BlackRock doesn't hand out positions like that. They do when you deliver 47% annual returns consistently. When you manage $280 million without a single client complaint. When you build something real instead of stealing from your own family. I looked directly at Richard. You called me worthless last night. A failed investment. A disappointment. But BlackRock, a company that manages $10 trillion, calls me exceptional. The cameras captured Richard's complete destruction. His face had gone gray, aging 10 years in 10 minutes. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, everything he'd believed about himself and me, all shattered. The best part, I continued, Margaret Smith recommended me. The CFO you drove out because she had integrity? She's the reason BlackRock noticed me. The people you discarded became my champions. Patricia Hoffman spoke up. Ms. Anderson, would you consider staying with Anderson Holdings as CEO? The room held its breath. No, I said simply. This company is built on ego and fraud. I build on merit and results. Besides, I start at BlackRock on April 1st. Richard struggled to his feet, shaking off security's hands. For the first time in my life, he looked small, fragile, every one of his 60 years showing. "Grace," his voice cracked, "you can't do this to me. I'm your father." "Yes, you are," I said, stepping closer to the podium. "And for 34 years, I waited for you to act like one." The room was silent, 200 people holding their breath. "Do you remember my first day at Wharton?" I asked. "You told everyone at the country club I only got in because of your donations. I had a full academic scholarship, Dad. I turned down Harvard because you said Wharton was better, but you couldn't let me have even that victory." Richard's hands gripped the podium. "I was preparing you for the real world." "No, you were feeding your ego. When I made partner at 31, the youngest in Sterling Capital's history, you told everyone it was because of quotas. When I landed the Berkshire deal, you said it was luck. When my portfolio hit $100 million, you said anyone with a calculator could do it." I pulled out a folded paper from my folder, one I'd carried for 15 years. My first performance review at Sterling. Exceptional analyst, natural leader, highest potential we've seen in a decade. You never asked to see it. You never asked about my work at all. You were too busy celebrating Michael's failures, because at least he failed the way you understood. "That's not—" "June 15th, 2018, I continued. "Michael's second bankruptcy. You threw him a party. A party, Dad, to celebrate his courage. The same week I was named to Forbes' 30 Under 30, you threw your son who lost millions a party, while your daughter who made millions ate dinner alone." Tears were running down my mother's face. Several audience members were crying too. "But here's what you never understood," I said, my voice steady. "Every insult made me work harder. Every dismissal made me more determined. Every time you called me worthless, I added another million to my portfolio. You created your own destroyer, Dad. Your contempt forged me into someone you could never defeat." "I gave you everything," Richard shouted, desperation breaking through. "The best schools, the best opportunities. You gave me money, not love. Criticism, not support. And then you stole even the money when Grandma tried to give it directly." I looked him in the eyes. "You want to know the truth? I didn't need your money. I needed a father who saw me. Just once. Just saw me." Richard's face crumpled. For the first time in my life, I saw him understand what he'd lost. "But you couldn't see past your own reflection," I said quietly. "And now everyone else can see exactly who you are." Patricia Hoffman, the lead independent director, stepped to the secondary podium. Her voice carried the authority of 30 years in corporate governance. "Given the revelations presented today, I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Richard Anderson as chairman and CEO of Anderson Holdings." "You can't," Richard protested. The bylaws require a majority of shareholders present to call such a vote," Hoffman interrupted. "We have over 80% of shares represented in this room. All in favor of the motion?" Hands shot up across the room. Not just a few, nearly everyone. Even some of Richard's longtime allies raised their hands, unable to stand by him after what they'd witnessed. "Ms. Anderson," Hoffman addressed me formally. "As a shareholder, your vote?" I raised my hand. "In favor." "The motion passes with 78% approval. Richard Anderson, you are hereby removed from all positions at Anderson Holdings, effective immediately." The gavel came down with finality. Richard staggered. 40 years. I built this company for 40 years. "And destroyed it in 40 minutes, Thomas Wright said, stepping forward. "The board names me interim chairman. Our first order of business, full cooperation with all investigations and a complete audit of the past decade's finances." "This is a coup!" Helen shouted. "You planned this." "No, Aunt Helen," I replied. "You planned this when you decided to steal $3.5 million. I just exposed it." Jennifer Walsh from the SEC stood up. "Mr. Anderson, Ms. Morrison, you'll need to come with us. We have questions that need immediate answers. As security and SEC officials surrounded Richard and Helen, my father looked at me one last time. You've destroyed everything. No, Dad, I revealed everything. There's a difference. The Wall Street Journal reporter was typing furiously. Ms. Anderson, the headline tomorrow will be Anderson Dynasty Falls in Shareholder Coup. Any comment? Just one, I said, gathering my things. The dynasty fell years ago when it chose greed over family, ego over ethics. Today we just held the funeral. As they led Richard out, I heard him mumble to himself. She was supposed to stay quiet. She always stayed quiet. Thomas Wright approached me. Grace, I know you're going to BlackRock, but if you ever reconsider... Mr. Wright, this company needs to rebuild from the foundation up. That's not my job. My job is to build something new, something clean, something that would never treat a daughter the way Richard Anderson treated me. The meeting was adjourned at 10:47 a.m. In less than 2 hours, 40 years of power had evaporated, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Power, I'd learned, didn't come from volume. It came from truth, strategically deployed. Within 3 hours of the meeting's end, the consequences cascaded like dominoes. The SEC froze all of Richard's and Helen's personal assets, $47 million in total. Every bank account, every investment, every property locked down pending investigation. Helen's attempt to wire money to the Caymans during the meeting had been blocked and flagged as attempted flight risk. By 2 p.m., the FBI had executed search warrants at both their homes. They found what Margaret had predicted: boxes of documents Richard thought he'd destroyed, backup drives hidden in his home safe, and a second set of books that revealed even more fraud than we'd discovered. Sandra Patterson called me at 3 p.m. Grace, the trust fund has been recovered. $3.5 million plus interest and penalties comes to $4.7 million. The federal judge signed the order. It'll be in your account within 72 hours. What about criminal charges? The DOJ is filing 18 counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Your father's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. Helen's looking at 10-15. Michael's cooperation deal might get him down to 3-5 plus mandatory rehab. The Wall Street Journal's afternoon edition hit at 4 p.m. Anderson Dynasty crumbles. Daughter exposes decade of fraud at shareholder meeting. The article included a photo of Richard being escorted out by security, his empire literally behind him. Bloomberg's headline was more brutal. From boardroom to courtroom, how Richard Anderson lost everything in 90 minutes. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Clients from Sterling Capital called to congratulate me. Competitors called to offer me positions. 3 publishers wanted book deals, but the most interesting call came from the federal prosecutor's office. Ms. Anderson, your documentation is impeccable. With your permission, we'd like to use this case as a template for prosecuting corporate family fraud. Your thoroughness will help other victims. Of course, I said. No one should have to stay silent about theft just because the thief is family. By evening, Anderson Holdings stock had dropped 40%. 3 major clients pulled their accounts. The board announced a comprehensive restructuring and a name change to Northwest Investment Partners. They wanted no association with the Anderson name. Michael's arrest for DUI that evening, while trying to flee to Canada, was almost anticlimactic. The police found 2 kilos of cocaine in his car. His 3 to 5 was about to become 10 to 15. Every crime they'd hidden, every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd stolen, all exposed in a single day. The empire Richard spent 40 years building was gone in 4 hours. This story reminds us that sometimes the people who should protect us become our greatest adversaries. But here's the truth. Real success doesn't need approval from toxic people. If you're trapped in a similar situation, remember, your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. Like this video if you believe in setting healthy boundaries and standing up for truth. My mother called at 9 p.m., sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. How could you destroy our family like this? She wept. Your father's in federal custody, Michael's in jail, Helen's on house arrest. How could you? Mom, they stole millions. They committed fraud. They're family. You don't do this to family. And what about what they did to me? 15 years of public humiliation wasn't destroying family? That was different. That was just Richard being Richard. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just Richard being Richard. Do you hear yourself? You're excusing criminal fraud as a personality quirk. You could have come to us privately. I did, Mom. 5 years ago, when I first suspected something was wrong with Grandma's trust, you told me not to make waves. 3 years ago, when Richard gave Michael another million after his second bankruptcy while telling everyone I was a disappointment, you said to be patient. Last year, when Margaret hinted at financial irregularities, you said to mind my own business. Silence on the other end. You chose your side 30 years ago, Mom. You chose to enable him, to look away, to make excuses. And now you want me to feel guilty for refusing to be complicit? I'm your mother. Then act like it. For once in my life, take my side. Say grace. I'm sorry I let him hurt you. Say grace. You deserved better. Say anything except making me the villain for exposing the truth. She hung up. Within the family, lines were drawn immediately. Cousin Sarah called within an hour. About fucking time someone stood up to Uncle Richard. Grandma would be proud. But most of the family sided with Richard. Aunt Patricia sent a text. You've destroyed the family name. Was your revenge worth it? I responded, it wasn't revenge, it was justice, and yes. Uncle Thomas, Richard's brother, left a voicemail. You ungrateful brat, after everything this family did for you. The family WhatsApp group exploded with messages until I simply left it. Blood might be thicker than water, but it wasn't thicker than $8 million in fraud. Michael's wife, Jennifer, called from the courthouse. He's in withdrawal. Cocaine addiction for 3 years. Did you know? I suspected. The lawyers say if he cooperates fully, testifies against Richard and Helen, he might get minimum security, maybe even rehab instead of prison. That's his choice. You could help him. Write a letter to the judge. Jennifer, he knew about the stolen trust for 3 years. He stayed quiet for money. I won't help him avoid consequences. She hung up too. By midnight, the Anderson family was officially broken. But it had been broken long before I stood up in that boardroom. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Monday morning, I flew to New York on BlackRock's private jet. They wanted to finalize everything immediately. The story had gone national, and they wanted to capitalize on the attention. Larry Fink met me personally at their Manhattan headquarters, 50 floors of black glass and power overlooking the Hudson. Grace, he said, shaking my hand. That was quite a weekend. Mr. Fink, I hope the publicity doesn't what? Make you the most famous whistleblower in corporate America? The woman who chose truth over family fortune? Grace, our clients are calling to specifically request you manage their portfolios. We sat in his corner office, the city sprawling beneath us. Here's our offer. $2.5 million base salary, 30% performance bonus potential, full relocation package worth $500,000. You'll manage the Northwest Division, starting with $1.2 billion. Based on your track record, we expect you to grow that to $5 billion within 2 years. That's generous. That's conservative. Your Berkshire deal alone generated $47 million in returns. Your 5-year average beats our top performers by 12%. But more importantly, you've shown integrity under pressure. Our clients value that above everything. There's something you should know, I said. Richard's already trying to sabotage this. He called 3 board members from jail. Larry laughed. He called me too. At 3 a.m. from federal custody. Tried to convince me you were unstable, vindictive, unemployable. I told him that if those qualities could generate 47% annual returns, I'd hire more unstable people. The contract was 60 pages of legalese, but the key points were clear: complete autonomy over my division, a team of 50 professionals, and resources that Anderson Holdings could never have imagined. "One question," Larry said as I signed. "Any regrets about how it played out?" "No. For 15 years I tried to earn his approval by being excellent. It took me too long to realize that excellence was never the currency he traded in. He only understood power and humiliation, so I gave him both." "Start date?" "April 1st. I need 2 weeks to close out my sterling obligations properly." Of course, the woman who documented fraud down to the penny wouldn't leave loose ends. He stood, extending his hand again. "Welcome to BlackRock, Grace. You're going to change the game here." As I left his office, my phone showed 17 missed calls from Richard's lawyer. I blocked the number. Some conversations were finished before they started. Packing up 15 years of life in Seattle took 3 days. My Pike Place penthouse had been my sanctuary, the one thing I'd bought entirely with my own money. No Anderson family connections. It sold in 48 hours for $2.3 million, $400,000 more than I'd paid. Even in exile, I was profiting. As I wrapped each item, I felt layers of armor falling away. The crystal decanter set from Richard's 50th birthday. Goodwill. The family photos from holidays where I smiled while being mocked. I kept just 3. One with Grandma, one from my Wharton graduation where I stood alone but proud, and oddly, one from when I was 7 and Richard was teaching me chess, before he realized I might win. Margaret came by to help on the second day. "I found something," she said, pulling out an old Anderson Holdings newsletter from 2009. There was a photo of me as an intern, bright-eyed and eager. The caption read, "Richard Anderson's daughter Grace joins the family business." "You looked so hopeful," Margaret said softly. "I thought if I worked hard enough, he'd see me, really see me." "He saw you, Grace. That was the problem. He saw someone who could surpass him, and he couldn't handle it." I donated $100,000 to the Seattle Women in Finance Foundation, specifically earmarked for women escaping toxic work environments. The director called personally to thank me. "Your story's given courage to dozens of women already. 3 have come forward about financial abuse in their own family businesses." My Sterling Capital team threw a farewell party that Thursday. What was supposed to be a small gathering turned into an event with 200 attendees. People I'd never met came to shake my hand, to tell me I'd inspired them. My CEO pulled me aside. "Grace, I'll match BlackRock's offer. Hell, I'll exceed it. Stay." "Tom, it's not about money." "I know. It's about becoming someone new. Someone who isn't Richard Anderson's disappointing daughter." As the movers loaded the truck, I stood in my empty penthouse one last time. 15 years of trying to prove myself in a city where everyone knew me as Richard's daughter. Now I was heading to New York, where I'd just be Grace Anderson, managing director. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is your mother. Your father wants to speak with you." I deleted it and blocked the number. Some bridges, once burned, provided better light than passage. Friday afternoon, my last day at Sterling Capital, something unexpected happened. I walked into the conference room for what I thought was a small farewell gathering. 200 people stood and applauded. Not polite golf claps, a standing ovation that lasted 3 minutes. Tom, the CEO, took the microphone. "Grace Anderson has worked here for 10 years. In that time, she's generated more revenue than any 3 partners combined. But that's not why we're here." The room quieted. "We're here because last Sunday, Grace showed us what courage looks like. She stood up to power, corruption, and her own family to do what was right. She showed every person in this room that integrity isn't negotiable." Jennifer Park from compliance stood up. "Grace, you trained me when I started. You told me that numbers don't lie, but people do, so always trust the data." That advice saved our clients millions last year. One by one, people stood to speak. Junior analysts I'd mentored, clients whose portfolios I'd saved during the 2020 crash. Support staff I'd treated as equals when others didn't. Marcus Chen, a portfolio manager, said something that hit deep. "I watched Richard Anderson humiliate you at 3 different industry events. You never badmouthed him, never played victim. You just went back to work and outperformed everyone. You taught us that success is the best revenge, but truth is the best justice. Tom pulled me aside after. Grace, I need you to know something. Richard called me 18 times this week, tried to get me to fire you, blackball you, even suggested I could take your clients if I cooperated. What did you tell him? I told him that his daughter had more integrity in her little finger than he had in his entire empire. Then I recorded the calls and sent them to the FBI. The gift they'd prepared wasn't a gold watch or a plaque. It was a donation of $50,000 to the Women in Finance Foundation in my name, and a bound book of letters from every client I'd ever worked with, thanking me for protecting their futures. The last letter was from Tom himself. Grace, you didn't just manage portfolios. You managed to maintain your humanity in an inhuman industry. BlackRock is lucky to have you, but they should know. We'll be trying to steal you back. As I left Sterling Capital for the last time, security guards, janitors, and executives all lined the lobby to say goodbye. For the first time in my professional life, I felt truly seen. Saturday morning, my last in Seattle, I met Margaret at the original Starbucks in Pike Place Market. Tourists crowded around us, but we found a quiet corner overlooking the Sound. I have something for you, she said, sliding a USB drive across the table. Everything. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence, including things that didn't make it into the official investigation. Margaret, why? Because Richard's not done. He'll try to rewrite history, claim he was framed, that you manipulated everything. This is insurance. She pulled out a second item, a leather journal, worn and familiar. Your grandmother's diary, from the last year of her life. I've been keeping it safe. I opened it carefully. Grandma's handwriting, still elegant even as she was dying. One entry from a month before she died. Richard resents Grace because she reminds him of what he could have been before greed consumed him. She has his intelligence but kept her soul. I'm leaving her the trust not just as inheritance, but as protection. He'll try to break her. The money will give her freedom to walk away. My eyes burned with tears I wouldn't shed. She knew, Margaret said softly. She knew exactly who Richard was and who you were. She tried to protect you. He stole even that. No, Grace. He delayed it. You got your inheritance, just not how she planned. You inherited her strength, her integrity, and now her vindication. Margaret pulled out her phone, showing me a news article. Anderson Holdings lost 3 more major clients yesterday. The board's discussing selling the company entirely. I don't care about the company. I know. But you should know that your courage started an avalanche. Helen's assistant came forward yesterday with 20 years of documentation. 3 more employees reported financial irregularities. The FBI says this might be the largest family corporate fraud case in Pacific Northwest history. We sat quietly for a moment, watching the ferries cross the bay. I testified yesterday, Margaret said. Told them everything. 10 years of watching Richard destroy anyone who threatened his ego. You were just the only one who survived long enough to fight back. What will you do now? Retire to Florida, teach part-time at the university. Try to train the next generation to spot the Richards of the world before they do too much damage. She squeezed my hand. What you did was brave, Grace. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As we hugged goodbye, she whispered, Your grandmother would be so proud. You didn't just recover your inheritance, you reclaimed your life. I watched her walk away, this woman who'd risked everything to help me find the truth. Heroes, I'd learned, didn't always wear capes. Sometimes they wore sensible suits and carried USB drives full of evidence. Sunday morning, 6 a.m., SeaTac Airport. I was checking in for my flight to New York when I heard his voice. Grace. Richard stood 20 feet away, flanked by his lawyer. He'd been released on $5 million bail, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days. His silver hair was unkempt, his usual commanding presence reduced to something desperate. You can't be here, I said, pulling out my phone. There's a restraining order. Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. His lawyer stepped forward. Ms. Anderson, My client simply wants to resolve this matter privately. Like he resolved stealing my inheritance privately? Richard moved closer, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. Even now, he was looking for an angle. Grace, we can fix this. Drop the criminal charges. I'll give you $5 million, cash, today. You already owe me $4.7 million from the trust. $10 million then. $10 million to make this go away. I laughed. You want to buy my silence? Now? After everything's already public? The trial hasn't started. You can say you were mistaken, emotional. Emotional? I stepped closer to him, security guards now watching us carefully. I presented financial documents, authenticated emails, forensic accounting. Which part of that was emotional? You destroyed me, he said, his voice breaking. 40 years of building a reputation, gone. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. I'm your father! No, you're a man who happened to contribute DNA. A father would have celebrated my successes instead of diminishing them. A father would have protected my inheritance instead of stealing it. A father would have loved me for who I was instead of hating me for who I wasn't. His face went red. You ungrateful— Sir, step back. Airport security had arrived. Ms. Anderson, is this man bothering you? He's violating a restraining order. His name is Richard Anderson, currently under federal indictment. As security surrounded him, Richard made one last attempt. Grace, please, I'll lose everything. You already did, Dad, the moment you chose greed over family. They escorted him away, his lawyer scrambling after them, probably calculating the bail violation charges. I watched him go. This man who'd loomed so large in my life, now small and pathetic in the harsh airport lighting. My phone buzzed. A text from the federal prosecutor. Security footage captured everything. Bail violation and attempted witness tampering. He's going back to custody. I boarded my flight to New York 30 minutes later, leaving Richard Anderson and his crumbling empire 3,000 miles behind. April 1st, 8 a.m. BlackRock's Manhattan headquarters stretched into the fog, 52 floors of black glass and infinite possibility. The security guard smiled as I badged in. Welcome, Ms. Anderson, 52nd floor. My office faced south, overlooking the entire financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference table for 12, and on the desk, a nameplate that read simply, Grace Anderson, Managing Director. Not Richard Anderson's daughter. Not disappointing investment. Just my name and a title I'd earned. My team had assembled in the main conference room, 50 of the brightest minds in finance. Different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities. The opposite of Anderson Holdings' old boys club. Good morning, I said, standing at the head of the table. I'm Grace Anderson. You've probably heard the story. Yes, it's all true. Yes, my father's under federal indictment. No, that's not why we're here. A few nervous chuckles. We're here because BlackRock has identified a $50 billion opportunity in sustainable technology investments over the next 5 years. Our job is to capture at least 10% of that. That's $5 billion, which would make us the most profitable division in the company. Sarah Kim, a senior analyst, raised her hand. Ms. Anderson, your track record shows consistent 47% returns. How? By looking where others don't. My father taught me that, ironically. He was so busy looking at traditional investments that he missed the tech revolution, the sustainability movement, the entire shift in generational wealth. We won't make that mistake. Marcus Thompson, a portfolio manager, spoke up. We heard Richard Anderson tried to sabotage your hiring. He did. He failed, and that's the last time we'll discuss him in this office. I'm not here as Richard Anderson's daughter. I'm here as your managing director. What I did or didn't do to my family is irrelevant to our mission. The team nodded, understanding. Now, I pulled up our first presentation. Let's talk about turning $1.2 billion into $5 billion. As the meeting progressed, I felt something I'd never experienced at Anderson Holdings or even Sterling Capital, the freedom to be judged solely on my merits. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard Anderson denied bail after airport incident. I turned it off. That was another person's life, another person's story. Mine was just beginning. 2 weeks into my new role, the news from Seattle came in waves, each more damaging than the last. Anderson Holdings stock had dropped 40% since the shareholder meeting. The Wall Street Journal ran a devastating expose. The house that Richard built, a legacy of fraud. 3 major institutional investors pulled out, taking $500 million with them. Thomas Wright called me from Seattle. Grace, the board voted to sell. We have 3 offers, but none are close to the previous valuation. The Anderson name is toxic. That's not my problem anymore, Thomas. I know. I just thought you should hear it from me. The company your grandfather started, that your father built, it'll be gone by summer. Michael's situation had deteriorated further. The cocaine possession charges, combined with the fraud conspiracy, meant he was looking at 15 to 20 years. His wife had filed for divorce and moved back to Portland with their kids. My mother had filed for divorce too, according to the Seattle Times. After 30 years, she was seeking half of whatever assets weren't frozen by the FBI. Her lawyer had reached out to me for a statement. I declined. Helen had pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testifying against Richard. 2 years in minimum security, 5 years probation, and $500,000 in fines. She'd lost her real estate license, her position on 3 nonprofit boards, and most of her society friends. But Richard's fall was the most complete. The FBI had uncovered 20 years of tax evasion, adding another dozen charges to his indictment. His legal team quit when he couldn't pay their retainer. He was assigned a public defender. Margaret sent me a photo from the Seattle courthouse. Richard in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, being led to a hearing. The man who'd worn $5,000 suits now wore federal custody orange. The empire he'd spent 40 years building hadn't survived 40 days without him. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not regret, just nothing. He was simply a stranger who'd stolen from me once. May arrived with a flood of communications from Seattle. Family members who'd shunned me suddenly wanted to reconnect. I developed a simple system for handling them. My mother emailed weekly, each message a variation of the same theme. When will you forgive us? My reply, sent once and then set to auto-respond. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I forgive you for my own peace. But reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm done, genuine remorse, and changed behavior. When you're ready to acknowledge that watching my father abuse me for 15 years was wrong, we can begin a conversation. Until then, please respect my boundaries. Cousin Sarah was the only family member I stayed in contact with. She'd publicly supported me from the beginning and had her own stories of Richard's cruelty. He destroyed my dad's business in '08, she told me over video call. Made him beg for a loan, then took his company when he couldn't repay it. Dad never recovered, died of a heart attack 2 years later. Michael wrote from federal detention, a rambling 10-page letter about how I'd destroyed his life, his children's future, everything. I had my lawyer respond with a cease and desist. The extended family chose sides. Most sided with Richard. Blood loyalty and fear of association with the traitor. I received dozens of messages calling me variations of ungrateful, vindictive, and cold. I responded to none of them. My therapist in New York, Dr. Williams, helped me process it all. You're not obligated to maintain relationships that harm you, even with family. But they keep saying I destroyed the family. No, you revealed what was already broken. There's a difference between breaking something and acknowledging it's already broken. I hired a family law attorney to handle all communication. Any family member who wanted to contact me had to go through her. The filter was simple: acknowledgement of the fraud and abuse, or no contact. In 6 months, only 3 family members met that criteria. 3 out of 47. I was building a new family instead. Colleagues who respected me, friends who knew me as Grace, not as Richard's daughter, a therapist who helped me understand that love shouldn't require enduring abuse. The boundaries weren't walls, they were doors, and I'd finally learned who deserved a key. October in New York felt like a different lifetime from Seattle. 6 months at BlackRock had transformed everything. My division's portfolio had grown from $1.2 billion to $1.8 billion. We'd exceeded every quarterly target, and Larry Fink had personally called to congratulate me on landing the Samsung Renewable Energy Fund, a $400 million addition that my team had secured through innovative structuring. I'd been promoted to Senior Managing Director, making me one of the youngest in BlackRock's history. The salary increase was substantial, but more importantly, I now reported directly to the Global Investment Committee. My apartment overlooked Central Park, a penthouse I'd bought with my own money, no family connections, no inherited wealth, just the fruits of my own labor. I was seeing someone, David Chen, a tech entrepreneur who knew nothing about Seattle finance and had never heard of Richard Anderson. To him, I was just Grace, the woman who beat him at chess in Washington Square Park and then agreed to dinner. That morning, I was preparing for my keynote speech at Wharton's Women in Finance Symposium. 300 students would hear my story, not the family drama, but the professional journey. My assistant knocked. "Ms. Anderson, there's news from Seattle you should see." Richard had been convicted on all counts. 18 charges of fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. The sentence, 22 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15. At 60, it was effectively a life sentence. The news showed him being led away in shackles, looking confused and small. The mighty Richard Anderson, reduced to federal inmate number 47892. I felt peace. Not joy, not vindication, just peace. That afternoon, I stood before 300 Wharton students and began. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. I spent 15 years trying to earn approval from someone incapable of giving it. The day I stopped seeking validation from toxic sources was the day my real career began. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later, walking through Central Park with David, he asked, "Do you ever regret what happened with your family?" "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. And now?" And I looked at the New York skyline, my new city, my new life. Now I'm exactly where I should be, not as someone's daughter, someone's disappointment, or someone's victim, just as Grace Anderson, who happens to be very good at making money grow. My phone showed one new message, from Margaret. "Saw your Wharton speech online. Your grandmother would be so proud. You didn't just inherit money, you inherited her courage." I smiled, took David's hand, and walked forward into my own future. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're struggling with toxic family dynamics, remember, you don't owe anyone your suffering just because you share DNA. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-love. Real family supports your growth, not your destruction. Subscribe for more stories about resilience and recovery. And remember, your worth was never theirs to determine. Stay strong, eh?